Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Random Thoughts. I am your humble bard, Tim, or humble DM, Tim. I can't remember how I would introduce this anymore. It's been a while, as you might have noticed, but I decided to crawl my way out of my depression and get out there and start making another video for you all. And this one's on a topic that I've been pondering about quite a lot recently. And that is when it is best to end a campaign. Now, there are obvious points when a campaign comes to an end, obviously being when the adventure module that you're currently running finishes up or when you do a TPK. However, there are certain circumstances when you are running a long-running campaign or even a shorter campaign, something that you've planned out yourself. And a lot of the time when you're planning something, you tend to, at least in my experience, you tend to build to a particular point. Now, you don't want to try and you sort of build and build and build and build and build and build. Then you'll sort of have like a midway point, then it'll sort of drop off a little bit, then it'll build and build and build and build and build, and then you'll have a really big, hopefully really big, final ending to the adventure. One thing that I have discovered in my time is that it is possible when running a D&D adventure for the adventure to go on too long. Now, what I mean by that is an adventure can, at times, or at least with players, it can as well, they can get tired of playing the same character. They want to try something new. Now, that is always something acceptable. However, it can throw off the way that the adventure plays out, especially if there are a lot of plot points tied to that particular character. Now, as an example that I can give in one of the adventures that I ran, when we ran the geez, what was it called? The Death of Mortality. Jeez, that was I was thinking it was the End Times, but no, that was something else that I ran. No, the Death of Mortality adventure. Now, this was the end of a 2-year long campaign. The idea was that we started off doing Waterdeep Dragon Heist, that then moved into the Wild Beyond the Witchlight, which then moved into the Spelljammer Light of Xeraxis, which then moved into my own version of Descent into Avernus, and then moved into something else which I had sort of strung together using different other random modules in order to finalize the adventure for the Death of Mortality. Now, this is something that I'd sprinkled through the various campaigns, giving hints to what's been going on. The basic premise was that a being had been created, taking straight from the Planescape video game. A creature had been created that was the embodiment of people's mortality, and because when they would die, they would lose their mortality, no one could die. And that may have seemed all well and good to begin with, but then you've got people suffering from horrific injuries, being fireballed or disintegrated and turned into dust, but they are still alive. And the horror of this spreading throughout all of the world was what the players had to deal with. It wasn't like the death curse from the Tomb of Annihilation. This was like the life curse. The fact that no one could die no matter what happened. Like people being executed, having their heads cut off, and they were still alive. That kind of horrificness. Anyway, part of what I had planned for this adventure was for one of the players to be one of the key elements of this particular plot line. Basically, they were the one that allowed this creature to exist in the first place. And we've been running the adventure we're getting onto the 18-month mark now. So this person's been playing the same character for this entire time. And we're building and building and building and building, and we're getting to that point. And then his character died. Now, that wasn't necessarily the end of it, because, as I said, the character effectively couldn't die, but the way that they died, or where they were when they died, cut them off from where the players were. And so they couldn't immediately come back. And I spoke to the player after the fact and told him about what was sort of going on, and he just said he was bored with playing his character and wanted to play something new. And that, of course, basically killed all of the plans that I have, which will happen in particular D&D stories, where you have a particular plan and one of the players just goes, nah, it's not gonna happen, and that's it. Or they cast that one spell you weren't expecting and one hit your boss. There comes a time when you can either decide to try and move forward with the best of intentions and give a mediocre ending to an adventure, or call it quits there, or maybe even pause and let's see how things go and move on to something different. It's difficult in the moment to sometimes judge when that is, but if I had it to do over again, in hindsight, the place where I should really have ended that particular campaign was right after the descent into Avernus arc. Now, I know I had plans for this grand adventure. Like I said, the death of Mortality, that was going to be the big thing. But the players at the end of the Avernus arc were the happiest they had been with their characters. They had been through so much. They had defeated the mid-quel boss, as it was, or the midpoint boss of the adventure, because what I'd come up with was effectively a mirror image version of their party. So they were not quite clones, but they were people mimicking or pretending to be them, which related to one of the other characters. Now, that storyline didn't really have a great deal of background to it. It was sort of something that I thought would be kind of cool, but it was the arc that the players actually really were engaged in. And when they finally defeated the mirror versions of themselves, that was the high point of the adventure. Now, I know I wanted to move on and do the Death of Mortality arc, but what I really should have done in that instance, if just looking at it, once you reach that high point, it's often a good idea to stop the adventure, have a bit of a break, let the players build new characters or decide whether or not they want to move on, and then maybe go on with a new adventure, possibly with those new ideas, sort of starting again in order to build up for it. Because if you run for too long, your players will get burnt out, you will get burnt out, and it's always better to leave, as I said, leave on the high note, because when an adventure goes on for too long and things start to drag, they don't remember the good things. You start just thinking and dwelling on the bad things. And so when you think back to that adventure, you don't think of, oh yeah, that final boss fight was absolutely awesome. You think, oh yeah, we finally did that final boss fight, and that was all right. The midway fight in that adventure ended up being a lot more entertaining for them than the end adventure boss. Now, that just might be down to me as a DM, but it isn't the first time it's happened. I've actually noticed this, at least it might just be something to do with the way that I DM, but I find that if I have a long-running arc and the adventure goes on for too long, it tends to peak in the middle and then die towards the end. And I've never really worked out why that is. I'm sort of starting to think that maybe I should just end my adventures in the middle point, or at least find that high point and just stop. Like I was saying, like I'm trying to say with this, knowing when to end, you always want to leave your players wanting more. And probably the most recent modern example of that is the Marvel Cinematic Universe. They had all these fantastic plans, and they built and they built and they built and they built right up to Endgame, and they smashed it out of the park. Everyone absolutely loved it. Everyone was talking about it. And then they kept going. And they wanted to build and build and build, but the problem was, because they hit that high point, nothing was ever really going to match that high. And they had to start back down again. And of course, everyone wants the feeling of that high again, and they're not always willing to wait for the build-up, at least not in this particular instance, which is why you need to sort of stop it, reset, and allow them to start again and leave that adventure on the high so that they have the positive memories and not the negative, drawn-out parts of the adventure. I don't know if I'm making any sense, but another example I can give on this, knowing when to quit, was as a player as well. When you are not having fun with an adventure, it is vitally important that you confer this to your DM. And an example story that I will give was recently we had played the Tomb of Annihilation. And I know what everyone's thinking now. Is like, oh, of course, the Tomb of Annihilation. Yes, the Tomb of Annihilation is a bastard of an adventure, and it's meant to be. You're dealing with a person that's trying to bring a god of the dead into the world. No one's able to be resurrected, and he's built this tomb that is incredibly deadly. The problem with the Tomb of Annihilation is really, the problem with the adventure is the whole point of the adventure, at least the way that it's designed, is that it is designed to kill the players. And, well, not the players, sorry, it's designed to kill the player characters, not the players. You shouldn't be murdering your players. Characters okay, players not. Okay, just making sure. It's designed to kill the player characters, and because it is designed that way, you are 90% likely to end up ending the adventure with characters that you didn't start out with. And it's very difficult to maintain a connection to an adventure when your character keeps on dying. Now, I'll give you an example. This happened in our Tomb of Annihilation campaign. We ran through that, and by the end of the adventure, every single person in the party, there were 6 of us playing, six player characters. Every single person had died 4 times, except for my character. I had actually managed to avoid every single death trap just by not being near the areas where the traps are more than likely to be. So basically just sending other people in there, and they kept on getting killed. The problem was that because my character was the only one who was from the original group, I had no connection to any of the other new characters that kept coming along. And so the interest began to wane, and it began to wane for the other players as well, because it was getting ridiculous. You spend all this time building up a character sheet, and then suddenly, boom, your character gets absolutely wiped out, and you've got to go away and make another one. Now, it's funny a few times, but after a while, it starts to get really, really annoying. And it got to the point where all of us players were just done, and we basically just all sort of looked at each other and said, "You know what? You win. We're done with this because it's just not fun anymore." And so we actually we did a total party quit. We told the DM, "We're just going to jump into this pit, and we're all just going to die, and that's going to be the end of it because we're sort of done with this this particular adventure." So, I suppose my second point on this particular topic of knowing when to end something is when it stops being fun. Which, again, I will relay, that sort of goes back into my first point as well. Because you want to reach that high. You want to get that high point of the adventure. You want to build and build and build, and you want to get to that very high point. The drop-off or the come-down is always going to be the problem. And if you're not going to be able to build up to that particular height again, don't try. Because, at least not right away. Go away, let everyone calm down, let everyone revel in the joy and excitement of the victory that they have achieved, and then come at it fresh and start again. Because if you don't, I promise you, your games are not going to be remembered as fantastically awesome events, because they're not going to remember that mega high point. They're only going to remember that bitter ending. Another example I'll give before we go. I ran a game for Dungeon Studios last year called the Nocturnal Nexus. Now, the problem with the Nocturnal Nexus is that I was brought in to co-DM. The guy running it, Josh, he wanted to run the adventure as he wanted to do the social interactions, and I was told to design the maps and the encounters, and I would be the encounter dungeon master. But then some issues with scheduling happened, and I ended up having to run the entire thing, which was fine. I didn't mind that so much. What the problem was is that I didn't really have a good sense as to what the final boss was supposed to be. We sort of entered into this, and the idea was that there is a person who is a vampire, and she has somehow discovered this thing called the Nocturnal Nexus. And the DM had no idea what the Nocturnal Nexus was, what it did, what it would cause, and it was sort of, it's like, yeah, you figure all that out. It's like, okay, whatever. It kind of sounds boring, and just Curse of Strahd all over again. But one thing did strike me as fun, and that was every one of the players was asked what they would like to fight, or what creature haven't they ever fought in a Dungeons and Dragons adventure before. And the idea was to potentially bring those monsters in. So someone said a Beholder, someone said a false Hydra. No, we weren't going to do that, but a regular Hydra we could do. Someone said a purple worm, and someone said a Death Knight, and then someone said something with lots of eyes. Right, and the other person said they weren't fussed with what it was. Right, so those were the things that we got listed. And I just thought to myself, why don't I make that into one major encounter? And so that was where the Purple Worm Hydra Beholder ridden by a Death Knight came from. And you can see some of my other videos about the Purple Worm Hydra Beholder. And that was the encounter that I was the most looking forward to, because that was the thing that I had created. And then as the adventure built and built and built, and they finally ran into the Purple Worm Hydra Beholder, that was the fight where everyone had the most fun, because that was the peak, and then it dropped off again after the midway fight for the Purple Worm Hydra Beholder, and then they got to the final encounter, and there were some other issues. I'm not going to go into it at this stage, but that was really, if I'd been running that adventure from the beginning, the Purple Worm Hydra Beholder would have been where we ended it, like saying that this person was summoning a creature that would devour the world, an amalgam of all of these hideous creatures, and then boom, Purple Worm Hydra Beholder. They have to fight that, and then that's the peak. You know, it's like they've literally chosen the form of their their destructor, like the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man and Gozer. Yeah. Anyway, I don't know whether this has been helpful. I don't know whether this has made any sense, but yeah, just want to, like I said, it's just something that's been weighing on my mind. Is when is it best to end an adventure? And I think, yeah, like I've said, when it stops being fun is the main one, but also when you've reached that peak. Now, again, it's often difficult to tell when you think you've reached that peak, but it is okay, I think, as a DM to admit when, not admit defeat, but admit when something isn't working. Because you can tell when things aren't working. Actually, I'll give you another example. This was one of my home games, not one of the ones that I was recording, but we were running Phandelver and Below. This was a Friday night game after everyone had finished up work, so we'd schedule for everyone to show up around about 6 in the afternoon, and we'd go till like 9 or 10 o'clock at night, okay? So give people time to get some food and do whatever, and we'd sit down, we'd eat food, and then we would just hang out and play the game. And it was okay for the first couple of weeks, and then things started to go a bit wrong. One of the players that was there decided they didn't really want to do it anymore, so they dropped out, which is fine. That happens. But then you're running the game, and it gets to the point when you're looking around the table, and one of the players is literally just falling asleep, and the person beside them, their girlfriend, is having to keep waking them up. And then you've got one of the players that whenever you attack them is just like, all right, yeah, whatever, okay. And you can tell they're not really interested, or if you are attacking them, they just seem bored by the fact that that's happening. They don't care, or they're not taking it seriously. And it got to the point where I was like, yeah, this game just isn't working. I'm not going to run this anymore. And so we stopped. And I haven't really played another game with that group since that point. So, yeah, it is okay to quit. Not necessarily to admit defeat, but to know when it is okay to stop. I think it's probably the best way to actually put that in my words. Put that in my... It is okay to stop when things don't seem to be working. Now, again, in hindsight, it is very easy to see when these things, like I was talking about the other games with the Purple Worm Hydra Beholder and the Death of Mortality. Hindsight's always 20/20, and it can be difficult in the moment to know when these things are happening. But always try, as a DM, to be mindful of the situation. Actually, I'll give you another example. One final example before we go off. And this can sort of be covered in your session 0 or when people get together that aren't overly familiar with each other. But when someone says something that really offends another person, if they're upset and suddenly the atmosphere in the table gets really, really awkward, it's best always in that situation to stop. Now, that has happened. I won't go about the specifics of it, but I remember someone on the table made a joke, and one half of the table just went, ugh, and I went, And then I tried to go on, and I'm looking around the table, and you can see one side of the table is sort of like, oh crap, what have I done? And the other side of the table is just seething. And I just went, okay, hang on, are you okay? And they said, no, that really offended me. And they're like, oh, yeah. And the other person was really apologetic. They didn't mean for it to come off the way that it did, but it did come off in a really offensive way. And I completely understand where it was that they were coming from. So when something like that happens, again, stop the game, take a break. If you have to end the session early, that's fine. Because the last thing you want to do is to have things get worse. You want people to be able to talk about something. You don't want people to get into a fight. Now, if you're trying to run a game and there's animosity at the table, that's never a good thing when you've got players that don't like each other or get angry at each other. It's just not good for anybody. So in situations like that, again, you want to stop, take a step back, let everyone calm down, come back next week, come back next month, or if they decide they're done, then that's done. And again, that sucks, but that happens. That's just communities in general, really. Just people. So. Anyway, that is... I think I've rambled on enough about this particular topic. Like I said, I don't know whether this is going to be helpful. I don't know whether this is going to make any sense. I don't think this is going to be coherent at all. But, yeah, I guess, yeah. Okay, so here I am talking about how to end it, and I don't know how to end this fucking video. Alrighty then. So, until next time, remember to keep on blending. I have been your humble DM, Tim. And until next time, work out when it's best to end things. Okay, bye!